The neurotransmitter called dopamine has a modular function in our brain and can influence our behavior. For a long time, it was thought that dopamine was related to pleasure. This view is not entirely wrong, but in reality, dopamine is more related to motivation. This has been confirmed through several experiments. In one of them, scientists selected a laboratory monkey with destroyed dopamine neurons. They placed it next to a button where, when it pressed it, it received food and intravenous cocaine. After a while, the monkey started clicking the button non-stop. In other words, even without dopamine in its brain, the monkey was able to feel pleasure and repeated that behavior to get a reward. However, if you moved the monkey a certain distance from the button so that it now had to walk to the button to get the reward, it would stand still. It turned out that he didn't have the necessary motivation to get there. Another very classic experiment, which also determined the role of dopamine in motivation and not necessarily in pleasure, was developed by Professor Wolfram Schultz. In this experiment, scientists taught a monkey to sit on a chair and gave it juice to drink. The scientists then placed an electrode in the monkey's brain to monitor the flow of dopamine in the reward region of the brain. Every time the monkey received the juice, they observed that the amount of dopamine in its brain increased significantly. Continuing the experiment, the scientists placed a light in front of the monkey and taught it that every time the light came on, the monkey would get a reward. After some time, they realized that when the light went on, the amount of dopamine in the brain increased absurdly, but when the monkey received the reward, its dopamine levels had already dropped. In other words, when the monkey received the signal of the reward, dopamine rose, but when the reward actually arrived, dopamine levels were already low and didn't rise. It's the same behavior as someone who goes out shopping and, when he sees a cake, his dopamine explodes. He puts the cake in his cart, but when he gets home and goes to eat it, there is no longer as much dopamine in his brain, and the craving he felt in the supermarket is gone. To understand this dopamine behavior, we need to understand how our dopamine system in general was developed. Human beings evolved in an environment without as many hyperdopaminergic situations as we have today. The classic neuroscience textbooks explain the injection of dopamine into the brain as a motivation to go out hunting and have sex. And that was exactly the function of dopamine during our evolution. Our ancestors woke up in the morning in their caves and had to worry, or rather, motivate themselves to go out and hunt for something to eat, find a river, and get water to drink, or reproduce to keep the flock big and strong. Today, most people have no such worries. That's why many researchers argue that today's society is so depressed and anxious because we no longer have vital concerns to live for. And our dopamine system was developed so that we live in an environment where you need to be engaged in always seeking something. Today, people are lying on the couch, with food in the fridge, water at their fingertips, and a place to live. And they're asking themselves, what do I do now? Then your dopamine system often leads you to common addictions, such as excessive video games, drugs, porn, and overeating, which are hyperdopaminergic habits. Your brain is looking for something and often turns to addictions that are easy. Gave you the motivation you needed to run away from danger, to go out hunting and fetch water, or to procreate. Nowadays, these spikes are increasingly frequent and happen when you drink alcohol, smoke a cigarette, watch pornography, eat or drink foods high in sugar or hypercaloric, consume social media for a long time, have an excessive social life, etc. With these constant dopaminergic triggers, your brain begins to perform down-regulation, and if these dopamine spikes are perpetuated in your brain, the tonic release of dopamine becomes extremely low. This leads to constant depression in your day-to-day life because you no longer experience difficulties. You only operate on phasic dopamine and don't give your brain a minute to rest. This is why you can't enjoy that camping trip with your parents without spending all day on your cell phone. Your day at work only makes sense if you go out drinking afterward. A person who understands this and decreases the dopamine spikes throughout their day is better able to take pleasure in the simple or difficult things in life, such as talking to other people, walking, working out, and studying, among other activities considered boring today. But what would be the way to overcome this? One way would be to do intermittent reinforcement. In other words, You don't have to stop the phasic dopamine bursts, but do it at intervals. Create a dopamine schedule. If today you did certain activities that generated high dopamine peaks, don't do them for a day or two. Of course, I'm giving examples here of extreme issues such as drug addiction, but this happens in the smallest things in our daily lives. Neuroscientist Andrew D. Huberman once said that if you like working out listening to music because it makes you more motivated, start tossing a coin every time before you work out, and if it comes up heads, you work out listening to music. If it comes up tails, you work out without listening to music. This is not a tip to reduce the intensity of your training, but to regulate your dopamine system. This system loves a maybe. Remember the little monkey I told you about who drank his juice when the light came on? Over time, the little monkey's brain got used to the fact that it would always get the juice after the light and gradually stopped releasing dopamine when it saw the light. That's because the reward was already certain. But if you take a group of monkeys who will receive the juice 50% of the time that the light turns on, but the other 50% they won't, the dopamine increases even more than before. In practical terms, if you want to work out listening to music because it motivates you, do it, but not all the time. Toss a coin and let the decision be made by chance. That way, you'll use the dopamine system to your advantage. Otherwise, after a while, the music that motivated you so much will no longer make a difference, because your system will have adapted to those high dopamine levels. Remember, our brains love a maybe. So, toss a coin and, if it comes up heads, like and share the video, and, if it comes up tails, subscribe to the channel and check out our other videos with more tips on controlling impulses and addictions. Thanks for watching and see you guys in the next videos.